the expected answer being no, they are not. It assumes that they are effectual means of salvation and asks, in what manner are baptism and the Lord's Supper effectual means of salvation? Well, that's it. So if I were to walk into an average conservative reformed group of people and say, I believe that the sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper, are effectual means of salvation, people would go nuts. What are you talking about? Why are you using language like that? It's dangerous to talk like that. You can't say that because that's contrary. And then here they would invoke the confession that they haven't read because the phrase is right out of the confession. It's as though I told some liberal from the ACLU that I have 3 guns at home, and because I have the right to keep and bear arms, and he looked at me like I was a nut and said, "Where did you get language like that? That's crazy talk." I said, "What do you mean crazy talk? It's right, it's right here in the, this is what the Second Amendment says." Well, it's the same with the confession. There are all sorts of in the controversy. I believe that we are being attacked in the name of the confession, where it's being appealed to, like the Queen Mum waving to the crowd on the balcony. How can you despise the Queen Mum like that? How can you be upset with her? How can you run her down that way? I wasn't running her down. I was quoting her. But they don't want her talking. They just want her on the balcony waving to the crowds for ceremonial reasons, and that's an abuse of what confessions are for.
Let me ask you about a specific thing that you've talked about before and that's still being discussed, and we've been accused of really trampling on something really vital to the faith if we deny it, which was the invisible church. And I know you don't deny it. I don't really. I don't deny it at all. But how helpful do you see this distinction, visible and invisible, that the confession does make? And I think, given the definition that the confession gives, I have no quarrel with it. But practically,
I think it's very helpful as far as it goes. So I have no problem saying the confession in chapter 25 says that defines the invisible church as the whole number of the elect, and I believe that there is a body of people known to God by name from before the foundation of the world, and this group of people, their number cannot be increased or diminished. So the whole number of the elect is present and real in the mind of God, and that's the invisible church. And that's how the Westminster Confession defines the invisible church. Then the visible church is the people gathered out of every tribe and nation together with their children, and they are set apart by the sacraments and the preaching of the word and discipline and so on. So those are the marks of the visible church. And I think that's very true. We've got the visible church, and God knows who will be there in the visible church at the end. And so that's why I've tried to make the same point. I'm not trying to replace the visible-invisible definition, but I'm trying to supplement the invisible-visible division by saying the same thing another way. So we have visible church and invisible church. Well, why not topple it on its side and say that we have historical church and eschatological church? In the eschaton, everyone will be, all the elect will be there. So the way the Westminster Confession defines the invisible church, the eschatological church is that body of people, the whole number of the elect. But at that day, it'll be visible, not invisible. So the eschatological church is the invisible church in its first visible manifestation. Visible to us. It's visible to God. The invisible church is visible to God, but only to God. At the eschaton, the invisible church will be made visible. And the historical church corresponds exactly to the visible church, as we go through history. And in the historical church or the visible church, you have wheat and tares together, you have sheep and goats together, you've got elect and reprobate together. And in history, it culminates in the manifestation of the elect. So I see the distinction I've made as simply saying the same thing that the visible-invisible distinction makes in another way that I think says a little bit more, but it says essentially the same thing.
What about one last thing? What I've contended, and I haven't asked you this. I don't think, at least I don't recall asking, but just to get your response. I'm contending we're building on the confession rather than ditching it and trying to start something new.
Correct.
And is that pretty much the way you're seeing this?
That's my understanding as well. If you went through when I subscribed to the Westminster Confession, I took a small handful of exceptions to the confession, and they are pretty much the standard exceptions that good Presbyterians everywhere take. And so I took an exception on some of their definitions about the Sabbath, and I took exceptions there, but they're the standard sorts of exceptions. So I don't disagree with the confession. I want to subscribe honestly. So if there's any place in the confession where I know I differ, I would take an exception there. And I've taken the same sorts of exceptions that I think many of our adversaries within the Reformed world have also themselves taken. I've taken those same exceptions or the same kind of exceptions. And I don't have any problem saying, yeah, I believe all the rest of this stuff I believe. But I don't believe that this Westminster's summary of biblical doctrine is an exhaustive summary of biblical teaching. I believe it's an exhaustive summary of their position in their point in history at their time, and I think it's an accurate statement of all the things that they're addressing. Personal soteriology, individual justification. I agree with all those things. But I think there are other issues that they weren't confronting and that we are. And the Bible addresses the things that we're confronting, but they weren't confronting them at that time, and so they don't talk about it. So if I say that the Westminster Confession doesn't address these other things, I'm not critiquing the Westminster Confession. It's not their fault they lived in the 17th century instead of the 21st.
Well, do we need another confession? Last question.
Yes, I think we do. I think we need more than one new confession. I think it would be very helpful. I think I've been talking to some of the folks on the Auburn Avenue side of things. I think we need to draft a statement of. Here's the one problem. I think we need to put together a confession of what we mean by federal vision, what we mean by the Auburn Avenue stuff in a short, compact way. I think we need to do that. The problem with doing it and calling it a confession is everybody says, "Oh, now you think you're on the level of what you meant." And, look who thinks he's John Calvin. Look who thinks he's a John Owen or some of the Westminster divines. And as you pointed out in your talk, Reformed pastors and ministers and sometimes individuals generated confessions, and up to the Westminster Confession, I think you said there was 50 different major confessions, and I think we need to start doing that again. And I'd like to see different groups do it so that if we did it, we wouldn't be seen as putting on airs or thinking we were something we weren't. But I do think we have a responsibility to say, okay, this is what we think we've learned, and let's condense it and put it out in a way that people can say, okay, this is what they're standing for. This is what they're saying.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.